Hi guys, this is Isaac from Mix Advice, and in this series I'm going to be showing you everything you need to know to get your kick drums sounding as good as they possibly can do with your home recordings. If you want them to sound like this, or like this, then keep on watching and let's dive straight in. Alright, hi guys, this is Isaac from Mix Advice. I'm going to be running a series of tutorials on kick drum processing. We're going to be looking at close mic EQ, compression, sample replacement, those kind of things. But firstly, I just wanted to do a tutorial on the importance of having a good mix in the first place so that your kick can actually cut through the mix. If your mix is too muddy or narrow, then your kick's going to struggle. And in this tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate that. So let's just take a listen to the mix as it is at the moment. Okay, you could probably hear it's quite narrow, it's a little bit muddy. Usually I'd go onto the individual channels, the bass, the guitars, maybe clean them up a little bit first. Okay, so let's take a listen to it and try identify some frequencies in which we can clean up in the bass and the guitars. They've been bussed together down this channel here. So we've just got bass and guitars all together. Usually they'd be separate, but for the purposes of this example, I thought it'd be easier to just do it down a single channel. Okay, so let's take a listen to the mix and try identify some of those muddy frequencies. So I'm boosting, sweeping around, just try to find those lower mids. They're a bit annoying, but lower, I think. Let's get that heavy bit in again. Definitely around there. So let's get rid of some of that. Now you can hear the kick drum really coming to the fore there. Yeah? So let's just take a listen to that again. I'll drop the EQ in and out and just listen to how the kick drum comes right to the forefront when we get rid of those muddy frequencies. In. There you go, the kick is right up front now. Back out again. In. Alright, and that's it for this tutorial. Your kick drum will struggle if the rest of your mix isn't well balanced, if there's things competing with it too much. So yeah, thank you very much. This has been Isaac from Mix Advice. I hope you found that useful, and hopefully I'll see you in the next tutorial. In this one, we're going to be looking at phase alignment and how important it is to make sure your kicks sound as good as they possibly can do in your home recordings. And just to make that point, what I've done is I've got the original kick drum sound and I've duplicated it. It's exactly the same sound, and what I've done is I've added a gain plugin with the phase invert button, and what we're going to do is just bring that in and out. Now remembering these are exactly the same signals, okay? So let's take a listen to it. Okay, now we have complete silence. That's because both signals are completely cancelling one another out. Let's bring it back in. We can hear it again. This isn't the case with the kick and the overheads because they are different sounds, but it is important that you get them in phase so they sound as powerful as possible in the mix. That's what we're going to move on to next. Okay, so I've just got the kick and the overheads aligned here in my session. Now, when you're doing this by ear, it's really important to listen to what sounds most centered rather than what you might think sounds best in solo. What sounds more centered will be what is in phase. When you get working on the rest of the mix, if it's out of phase, you're going to really struggle to get a really good kick drum sound. So let's take a listen to the differences. Okay, so this is as is. Let's bring it out of phase. You hear it sounds a lot more stereo. Let's bring it back into phase. Sounds a lot more centered now. And that's what you're looking for. So lo and behold, we were right. The kick and the overheads are in phase. And we know this by just analysing the peaks and the troughs in the signal. So for example, you've got this trough in the kick there, which aligns to the trough in the overheads, peak in the overheads, which aligns to the peak in the kick. The great thing about a DAW is you can just move it around until you know that it's in phase. So for example, pulling this out of phase now, so that peak and that trough are aligned with one another now, which is not what we want. What we want is the peak and the troughs to be aligned. So again, there's no excuse if you're using a DAW. It's easy to do. You can just eyeball it. It's important to do it across the whole of the kit to make sure that everything sounds as good as possible when you get to the mix phase. This is Isaac here from Mix Advice. Got another tutorial for you on kick drum processing. This time we're going to be looking at the close mic, how to EQ it, and look at a little gate trick that I like to use to give it even more presence without having to worry too much about cymbal bleed. So with that, let's get into it. We've got like quite a heavy progressive rock track here, and so the kick drum's really important. In fact, the drums in general are really important. So I'm just going to show you what I did with the EQ on the kick. So let's take a listen to that on solo quickly. So straight away I'm hearing kind of a narrow boxy frequency. And in cases like this, usually what I'll do is I'll sort of get a sense of where it might be around. So I'm feeling like lower mid somewhere. And I'll just do a big boost and then just sweep through the frequencies until I identify exactly where the problem is. So let's try that. And there it is. So let's get rid of that. And immediately you can hear there's a lot more depth to the kick. You can hear the clarity of the fundamental a lot better. Okay, but listening to it in the mix, it still sounds just a little bit narrow and a bit shallow. Let's do that now. And so what I wanted to do was really bring out the presence and clarity of the kick. So I did a nice big broad boost around 10k, so you're getting this little lift right from about 1k peaking at 10k, so nice big broad lift. And just listen to the difference on solo for a sec. So that's in, out, kind of dies, back in, much more up front. Okay, and to kind of balance that out so it's not too just clicky, I just introduced a bit of a boost around 70 Hertz. So let's see what we've got now. So this is in, out, completely dies, really narrow, honky, in, managed to transform the sound of that kick. And now in the mix it sounds much stronger, much more up front, and we don't need as much volume either because of this boost. So if you're worrying about cymbal bleed, often boosting you might feel like, oh, that's counterintuitive because I don't want to introduce more cymbal bleed. But it also means it doesn't have to be as loud in the mix to be heard, so it kind of balances itself out. So yeah, let's take a listen to that in the mix and see how it sounds. There's another little trick that you can use if you want even more presence. This is especially useful in metal. So if we look at the original channel that I've just been working on, the gate, we've got a hold of 100 milliseconds and a release of 300 milliseconds. This is to allow enough of the kick to come through so that it doesn't sound too unnatural, kind of like doo, 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 doo. That sounds unnatural. You need the whole kick to be coming through so you're hearing the full doo, 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 doo. And so that's quite important to get your gate right on that main channel. However, with this little gate trick to add extra presence, we do almost the opposite. So I've got a hold of 0 and I've got a release of 2 milliseconds. And then with the EQ on that channel, I've used a high pass filter to cut out everything up to about 2K, and then boosted some frequencies from about 6K upwards. And on its own, with that gate so tight, it sounds like this. It sounds really unusual. But obviously we're not hearing an excessive amount of cymbal bleed coming through that, so we can blend it in with the original channel. And just to make that point, let's listen to it in the mix, and I'll introduce it slowly and you'll hear it just become more and more present as the fader goes up. So now we've got a super clicky, super upfront kick drum sound. For this particular band, in this style of music, I feel like that's too much, so I'm going to bring it back down. But for things like metal, this can be an ideal little trick for you to just get that really upfront, super clicky sound. So let's just listen to it in the mix, try and balance it out, and see what we get. Thing that a bit. Cool, that's sounding pretty good to me now. Got a nice solid upfront kick sound that suits this style of music. So I hope you guys have found this useful, and I'll hopefully see you in the next tutorial. This has been Isaac from Mix Advice. Thanks a lot, and hopefully see you soon. Thank you. Hi guys, this is Isaac from Mix Advice, and what we're going to look at is how we can EQ our overheads and our room sound to make sure that the kick cuts through the mix and sounds as powerful as possible. Now, I've seen some tutorials on YouTube and they've just added loads of low end to those channels. This is like the opposite that you want to do. There's two reasons for this. Firstly, it's going to prevent your kick from cutting through the mix. And secondly, later on, when you're mixing your bass and your other instruments, it's going to be masking the low end, making it harder for you to have a defined, clean mix. Okay, so let's just take a look at what I've done with the EQ. On the overheads, a high pass filter up to about 90 Hz, and a little cut around 90 Hz as well. I think those two together sound a bit more natural than just pushing the high pass filter up even more. So let's take a listen to how this helps the kick cut through. So I'm going to take that EQ off and then I'm going to drop it in so you can hear the differences. In. Now that kick sounds a lot more centered. It has a bit more perceived low end volume, even though we've actually cut frequencies from the overheads. Let's take a listen to that again so you can really hear the difference. This is out. Drop it in. Actually, it sounds a lot more solid now. Now, one thing to note is if you push your high pass filter too high in your overheads, the whole mix is going to start to sound unnatural. You really want to still have the weight of the snare and the roominess kept in the mix, but just enough cut out of the low end so that your kick can come to the forefront. So let's just push the high pass filter a bit higher and you'll see what I mean. snares starting to sound really thin now. This is not what we want. Let's bring it back. Now the weight of the snare is still there, and it still sounds a bit more roomy. That's really important to keep in your overheads. Now a similar thing applies to the drum room sounds. So I've got it a little bit lower here, around 70 Hz. A tiny little cut here at 75. And I've taken some of the high end out as well. That helps it sit back in the mix a little bit. So if you take this off a sec, you'll hear what I mean. So there's a lot of fizziness now in that room sound. As soon as we introduce this low pass filter, it starts to sit back in the mix a little bit. So what I'm going to do now is take both EQs out, and you'll be able to hear just how much more that kick manages to cut through the mix with those cuts that we've made. So this is without. Let's bring those EQs in. Now you can hear there's a bit more perceived low end volume in the kick, even though we've reduced low end frequencies in the overheads and the room sound. Take it out again. Sounds a bit more shallow. Back in. And that kick is really coming up to the forefront now. Okay guys, so that was just a really quick tutorial on how to make sure your kick can really cut through the mix by reducing frequencies in the overheads in the room. Again, remember, you don't want those high pass filters too high, otherwise you're going to kill the roominess and the natural sound of those channels, but you want them just high enough so the kick can really cut through. This is going to be really beneficial later down in the mix when you're wanting to get your bass and the lower mids of the rest of your mix sounding really good too. Okay guys, I hope you found this tutorial useful, and I'll see you in the next video. Alright, hi guys, this is Isaac from Mix Advice again. We're going to be looking at sample replacement in this tutorial. What I have here is a kick drum that is a little bit lackluster. I'm going to take the EQ off so you can hear what it sounded like originally. Really narrow, really poor. Okay, now I'm going to bring some EQ in. That's helped quite a bit, but it's still just a little bit lackluster. So in cases like this, I will generally look for sample replacement. I have my own libraries that I tend to like to use, but for this tutorial I'm just going to stick with Logic, so you can use it at home. You can copy these settings if you like. So I've just got EXS24. All I've done is I've gone to my kick channel here, go to track, and then click this replace or double drum track, and that'll give you these options. And you just need to set your threshold so that the MIDI signals here match up with the kicks in the signal. So if we drop it right down, we'll probably be getting some snares in there. If it's too high, you'll only be picking certain kicks up. So you just gotta play around with that until you've got all of the kicks lined up that are correct. Okay, I've already done that, so we'll cancel that one out. So in EXS24, I've picked out this kick. Again, I usually use my own samples, but you can go to drums and percussion, single drums, find your kicks, acoustic kicks, and you can just cycle through these until you find something you're happy with. In the end, I just settled on this one, which sounds like this. Okay, and let's compare that to the original. Sample. I just feel that's going to give me the extra beef and consistency that I'm looking for in this. And then it's just a case of blending the two together to taste, really. It's a bit overbearing, that sample at the moment. So it's sat nicely underneath. kick dies, right? Bring it back in. Much more solid. So in the mix later on, I'm going to feel much more comfortable that I've got the sounds that I need to get the kind of kick sound that I'm after. The last point to make on that is if you're going to use Logic's built-in drum replacement, you need to check the phase. So on the kick drum sample channel, so they're just MIDI signals triggering some audio, I've flipped the phase on the gain plugin. That actually made it in phase. So it was actually out of phase originally. And I'll just show you the difference. Let's try even these out a bit first. Okay, so you hear how that sounds a bit more shallow? But when I bring it in again now, a lot more centered, a lot more solid. And so that's in phase now. Okay, and if you're not comfortable to do this by ear, all you got to do is just bounce down this MIDI channel to audio and then just reintroduce it into the track. So you'd have like another kick, say, here. And then just make sure that they're phase aligned with one another just by zooming in and making sure that the peaks and the troughs match up as much as they can do. There will be different sounds, so they won't look exactly the same like these two do, but you just make sure that the peaks and the troughs are more or less in line. Then you'll know they'll be in phase with one another. Okay, something else you might want to consider when doing sample replacement is bringing in a room sample. So I've got one loaded up here on my EXS24. So let's just take a listen to that on its own. Okay, so what we had originally without any EQ was this. Add the EQ in. Add the sample, beefs it up a bit, add the room in. We've managed to totally transform the sound of that kick. Typically with room samples, I like to add a delay. So if we go to sample delay, stereo, so let's link them, put 22 in there. Now that room sample will sit slightly behind the actual kick, but it will still sound like it's still one kick together. Let's have a listen to that. Too loud. Without the sample. And it just gives it that separation so your ears got more time to pick up on the actual room sample. But I'm still feeling that room sample lacks a bit of punch and power. So we're going to pop a compressor on it. Standard one from Logic. So what I've done is a really fast attack, 1 millisecond, so it's really capturing the transient straight away. A fairly fast release of 81 milliseconds. And in. Boom. Sounds so much bigger, so much more powerful. So now we've done that little bit of processing on it, and again we've got the sample, so we don't need as much volume for your ear to pick up on it. Let's take a listen to what we've managed to do. Add the EQ in, and then drop the samples in with the compression on the room and the delay. Sounds so much more powerful. The other great thing about using a room sample is that if you're gonna send it to a reverb, it sounds much more natural than the close make kick does when it hits the reverb. So let's take a listen to the original kick sound. I've got it sent to a reverb here, and it's just as pre-fader, so we don't need any volume on the channel whatsoever to hear it. Let's have a listen. Okay, let's take that out and drop in the room sample. That sounds so much more natural. Taking it back to the original kick. There's all that nasty clickiness coming out in the reverb. You don't hear any of that when we go back to the room sample. Just take a listen now. So that's a really useful way of just inflating your drums even more if you want super roomy, big, huge sounding drums. Taking room samples for your kick and driving reverbs with them can sound so much better than using your close mic kick sound. This is Isaac from Mix Advice, here with the final tutorial on kick drum processing. In this final one, we're going to look at parallel compression and how it can really bring out the attack and punch of your kick drum channel. So I just want to explain quickly how I've got this set up. So I've got all of my drums here and they've been bussed down to this channel here, which is a drum compressor auxiliary channel. Then I've bussed the compressor channel out to bus 2, which goes down the main auxiliary bus channel here. Okay, and we're going to be listening to the whole of the drums, but I really want you to focus on the kick drum in this one, as this is what these tutorials are all about. Okay, so I've sent various amounts of signal to the bus compressor channel, less of the overheads and the room mics, because I don't like it to sound too overbearing on those signals. But as you can see, there's plenty of kick being sent to this channel here, which has this compressor on it. On this compressor, I've got a really fast attack, 1 millisecond, because I really want to capture the transient, and a medium release of 150 milliseconds. So let's just take that out and see how it sounds as is. Okay, that's sounding pretty good, but I feel like the whole thing, especially the kick, can have more attack and more emphasis. Okay, so let's take a listen. Without the compressor, bring it in. The kick drum has a lot more attack now. Take it out. It's a bit more flat, it's a bit more shallow. Bring it back in. And there is that really upfront attack sound. If you wanted to, you could just double up your kick drum channel and compress it that way. It's just a lot more efficient and a lot more effective, I think, to bus it down to an aux channel where you can just blend in all of your different drum sounds to taste. So that concludes our set of tutorials on kick drum processing. I'm going to be moving more generally onto how to improve your drum sounds across the board in the next set of tutorials. And following that, I'm going to be doing a series of tutorials on how to mix the rest of your session. So again, this is a technique called parallel compression. It basically means you take your original signal and you blend it in with a compressed signal. And it can be really effective on the rest of the mix as well, which we're going to move on to in future sessions. I'm really looking forward to doing more tutorials. I hope this has been useful, and don't forget to subscribe. Guys, this is Isaac from Mix Advice. We've completed our tutorials on kick drum processing, but I thought I'd throw in a bonus session for you just to give you a few more tips to give you more flexibility with what you can do with the kick drum. Okay, so let's just take a listen to what we've got at the moment. Okay, I'm working on a metal track and we've got that nice deep low end kick which really suits this kind of music. But what if I wanted it a bit more punchy? So I'm just going to bring in this other channel now. Just take a listen to how different it sounds. Much more punchy, much more up in your face. Now the interesting thing is these two channels are exactly the same. They're just duplicates of one another. The only difference is they've been EQ'd differently. So if we take a look at the kick punch channel, this is how I've EQ'd it. So we've got a high pass up to about 71 Hz. So I'm getting rid of all the low end, and then I'm boosting around 100 Hz. Getting rid of all that low end and adding that upper low end around 100 Hz gives it that punchy sound. So just take a listen to that again. Really in your face. Okay, we'll go back to the other channel. Much fatter, much deeper. Okay, let's take a look at the EQ on the original channel. Okay, there's no high pass whatsoever, and there's a nice low boost around 62 Hz, which I think works really well for this style of music. But what we can do is double up our kick drum channels and blend them to taste. So if you're wanting something a bit more upfront, a bit more punchy, maybe you bring this channel up a bit louder and vice versa. So let's have a listen to them both with the drums and see what different sounds we can get. Okay, this is just the low end one. And let's start to introduce that kick punch channel, which we've EQ'd differently. It starts to get a bit more up front. Let's take the kick channel with the low end completely out. Really up front, really in your face. Again, these are exactly the same channels, they've just been EQ'd differently. You don't have to worry about phase, all you're doing is just blending those two different sounds to taste. So I'm going to do that now and see what results we can get. That's too up front for this style of music. I want that nice low end in there. Let's take the punchier channel out. It's missing something there. Bring it back in. Yeah, it's just a bit more up front now. So that's bonus tip number 1. Okay guys, thanks a lot. Meet me in the next episode for bonus tip number 2. On to our next tip on kick drum processing. This is almost the opposite of what I just showed you. This is to help you gain that really nice low end weight in your kick drum. Now I would say this is a bit of an advanced technique, but to be honest it's actually really simple. You just need to get your head around a concept called side chaining. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add some real beef and low end to the kick drum, and how we're going to do this is by using a test oscillator which comes with the Logic and produce a really low tone that's going to align exactly with the kick. On its own it sounds like this. Okay, and this is our test oscillator. Basically we can put any frequency we want in there. I decided to go with a really low one at 40 to just sit nicely underneath the kick drum. But at the moment it's just one pure tone going on continuously. So what we need to do is make sure it aligns with the kick, and how we do this is by bringing up a gate and side chaining it to the kick. Okay, and in this instance I've picked out something that I'm blending in with the kick drum, this electronic kick here, which is basically this channel here. So at the moment that sound is just a doubled up kick drum sound to help me enhance the original kick. So on the test oscillator channel, I'm just linking it to something that's happening at the same time as the kick sound. And it's going to wait for this channel to send a signal to open and close the gate. So let's just bring that gate in again, which is linked to this channel here. Okay, let's see what that sounds like. Now you can hear that test oscillator sound is exactly aligned with the kick drum sound. At the moment it's way too loud, obviously, but I just wanted to show you that for an example. One thing to note is that this is quite a low sound, so it's harder for your ear to pick up on it in the first place. So what I've done to bring that up front a little bit more is popped a compressor on. I've used this Studio FET by Logic, which tends to produce a nicely distorted sound. So let's just try that nice and loud and just see what kind of distortion we can create to help make that sine wave sound a bit more up front. If I speed up the release, there There we go. Loads of upfront distortion sound there. That's too much, I think, so I'm just going to bring it back. I just want a little bit of distortion to help it pop through the mix a bit more. Now it's just a case of blending that to taste within the mix. So way too loud at the moment. Bring it down. Okay, mute it. All that low end weight is missing now. Unmute it. Now we've got that fat low end in the kick drum again. Still probably a bit too loud. Bring it down a touch. Try that again. Unmute. It's all just punching the kick now. Bring it back in. Nice low end weight. Okay, so that was bonus tip number 2. And that totally concludes our series of tutorials on kick drum processing. I hope you've learned a lot of different techniques. Thanks a lot, guys. Don't forget to subscribe. I have a mixing and mastering service available. Check that out in the description. And don't forget to leave a comment. Any ideas that you have about other tips and techniques that might be useful for other people, just leave them in the comments section below. Thanks a lot, guys, and I'll see you next time.